how that differs from how I respond to complaints today at Topgolf, and happy to answer any questions that you might have, so feel free to raise your hand if something comes up and you think of something. So I wanted to start off and just say probably what's already obvious, but language is really the key element of a corporate culture and brand. It determines everything that a company says to its employees, to its guests, online. It really gives the company a personality and a voice. And I think that so many people underestimate the value of language in a company's culture. And it's something that I've come to appreciate even more since I've graduated from school. So the difference, in what I've seen at Southwest versus Topgolf, they're very subtle things, but it really gives each company a separate personality. Our voice at Southwest Airlines was very compassionate, empathetic, personal. It tended to be very detailed, although we started to get away from that as we introduced email in our guest communications. It was loving, appreciative, generous, just very representative of the president of Southwest Airlines, who was just one of the warmest, sweetest personalities you could ever know, and our communication reflected that. Now at Topgolf, it's more of a modern, edgy company, and so our voice is very playful, familiar. We even say it's flirty, tongue-in-cheek, more witty, but we also try to be very conversational and relatable, so it's like talking to one of your friends. So even though I've done guest communications at Southwest Airlines, transferring to guest communications role too at Topgolf was very, very different, and just the way that you might respond to the exact same situation is completely different language. So it's kind of interesting to see the differences between these companies. And then going further, even the terminology that we used. For example, at Topgolf, we refer to all of our employees as associates, and our visitors are guests or members. We say that you have hospitality instead of service, and we have our own little term for what Southwest called positively outrageous service, but we call it warm, open, welcome. So these are just very subtle things, but when you are using this language over and over again, it becomes instilled in your company's culture. And at Southwest Airlines, we always capitalize these words: employees, customers, departments, customer service. These were considered proper nouns, and you would never see them in lowercase in any communication whatsoever. So the first thing that we would do when we got a complaint at Southwest is, we really took the time to read what the customer was saying. We wanted to determine what is the customer's tone of voice, what are the main points that they're making, but what really prompted them to write. They might have 10 different complaints and go on and on and on about, oh, this flight was delayed, then my bag was delayed, this happened, somebody was rude to me. But we really tried to get to the heart of the matter. What set them off and really made them write to us? What kind of requests have they made, if any, or are they leaving it open-ended? And trying to identify what misconceptions or misinformation that the customer has in their correspondence that we might need to explain or come back at. So it's always important to really, get the full picture when you're reading these complaints. The next step, obviously, was to do research. Some of the worst letters that I had gotten responses on were ones that I was in a hurry and I really didn't take the time to research the way that it needed to be. So the research phase, I'm sure, as Kim can agree, is one of the most important steps. Finding out, first of all, has the customer written or called before? That might change everything. If that customer is a frequent complainer, and you've seen that they've gotten compensation, almost on a monthly basis for the past 3 years, it's going to change the way you respond this time. Whereas they've never complained before, but they've traveled with us 50 times. That gives us an indication of, kind of where they're coming from a little bit more. And then also finding out what are the undeniable facts. There's always 3 sides to every story: the customers, the employees and the companies, and then the truth, what you absolutely cannot deny. And so it was always important to go through our system records and finding out, okay, when did this guest actually check in? When did they check their bags? When did they actually board a flight? what kind of ticket did they purchase? Things that, you know, we can absolutely include in the letter without any concern for legalese and that sort of thing. And then we want to think about, could there be or is there another side to the story? A lot of times, again, you know, a customer would say, this employee did this, this, and this, and it sounds like the worst situation in the whole world. And then you get you get a report from the employee, and it's a totally different situation, and obviously they had an entirely different perspective, and you kind of start to piece together, okay, I see why, you know, they might have been upset, but they just misunderstood the employee's actions or that kind of thing. So making sure that you're thinking about the full picture, what else might have happened. And then also, one of the most important things is whether or not any other department needs to be involved in the conversation, particularly with Ms. Tigeman. The legal department is one that has become involved in the situation as a result of things, but, you know, identifying that kind of thing early on, certain key phrases, if someone says that they're interested in speaking to a lawyer, they're talking about legal issues or discrimination or anything like that, those are things that we would always flag and try to identify people that we might need to pass that complaint on. Okay. So then, after we did all the research and before we got started, we would think about, again, you know, does a written response even make sense? Is this better had on the phone, a phone conversation? Because sometimes you don't need to put everything in writing, or it's too complex of an issue that we wouldn't want to put it in writing. And, you know, it might even be something that was so sensitive and potentially so legal in terms of the issue that just calling and, you know, you can say more over the phone than what you can say in a written letter. You know, anything you write lasts forever, and so we would be very careful about in which situations it made sense to write versus call. And even in some cases, we wouldn't respond at all to a guest if it's something that they had written about previously, you know, over and over and over, and we've already addressed it, or somebody's already spoken to them on the phone. It might be one of those things that we just no response, or if the letter was particularly just, you know, laced with profanity or unreasonable, or we could tell they had never traveled on Southwest and it just seemed like a hoax or something like that, we would no response it. We don't want to waste our employees' time if it doesn't seem like a valid complaint. And then, you know, we would always think about what do we want to say and what do we not want to say. A lot of times with the letters that we wrote, there were certain things that we knew from our employees' reports or our internal records that I would love to say in a response to a customer, but in terms of protecting the company, I couldn't say those things. So, you know, figuring out sometimes how to apologize without coming out and saying, I'm sorry, and admitting guilt, because that can be a really tricky situation. And Southwest really changed our model of responding to customers. We tended to provide so much detail and so much information when I first started, and then by the end of my career at Southwest, we started having to pare back on our responses because it would get us into legal trouble. You know, if we couldn't verify everything as a fact, we didn't want to say it at all in our responses. So even saying something like, you know, I'm sorry that happened, well, that could potentially be an admission of guilt. So we would say, well, we regret your inconvenience, or we regret that you feel that way, but, you know, not necessarily saying, I'm sorry, or I apologize for it. It's just giving them that general feeling that you understand and you empathize, but we're not necessarily sorry. And then the other thing, you know, thinking about what message compensation, or in this, as I said before, an apology would send. Sometimes sending compensation can be considered an admission of guilt. And I had one situation where I felt really sorry for this customer, and I thought that I could make her happy by just refunding her entire family's round-trip tickets. And she turned around and sued us for $80,000 because she said, well, obviously you felt bad about the situation, and I kind of opened the door for her, you know, early in my career. And I realized later on that the compensation wasn't appropriate to the situation, and it's really important from a legal perspective that you always are providing the amount that matches what their inconvenience was, or not exceeding too much what they paid to Southwest. of the response, simple steps and things to keep in mind, always starting off by acknowledging, what their real experience was, saying you understand they were inconvenienced and regret that, explaining what the actual situation was or what the policy might be, and then either making it right in terms of compensation or an apology, or at least making sure that the customer feels heard. We would always, at the very least, say, we've shared your feedback with the appropriate leaders for their review and consideration. We wouldn't promise internal follow-up unless we actually knew that follow-up happened, because, again, that could be a potential legal issue. But, again, we'd close it by following up either with the customer internally as we promised or as we needed. And then just tips for responses, always edit over and over again. I probably went through 3 or 4 edits on every single letter that I wrote to our guests. Being concise and not feeling the need to address every single issue that a customer raises. Sometimes it's better to stick to the main points and avoid debate and getting into the nitpicky issues. Being friendly, sticking to the facts, and then, of course, being sincere and honest and as helpful as you can be. Always do what you say you're going to do, because some people will follow up with you, or again, you will see it coming back to you in the legal sense. Okay, so I brought a couple of examples too to show you kind of how Southwest responded, how I responded in these situations, and we can go over them. Okay, this one was really one of my most heartwarming ones. I always remember it when I think about Southwest, but kind of read it out loud here in case you all can't see it. But he writes to Southwest and he says, "I'm writing to you about a flight from San Francisco to Phoenix and then from Phoenix home to Cleveland. My son has a rare skin disorder. He has very fragile skin and this causes recurring blisters and sores. He cannot walk a lot, so he travels with his motorized scooter. I took my son along with my daughter to Camp Wonder in Livermore, California from Cleveland, Ohio. This camp is put on by the Children's Skin Disease Foundation. My flight was scheduled to leave San Francisco at 11:20 on 6/27/2009. I checked in our bags at 10:56 a.m., which I know is late. The man at the desk told me that our bags were not guaranteed to be on the flight. I explained that my son is handicapped and on the electric scooter, and he refused to check the scooter at the desk with the bags and said I could take it as a carry-on. This scooter is a full-size sit-down scooter. He also would not call the gate and tell them that we were on our way with my son and his scooter. Security documents were issued to me, not boarding passes. TSA security checked our carry-on bags and the scooter at 11:02 a.m. The Southwest gate was only 4 gates from the TSA security checkpoint. We got to the gate shortly after, which was not yet 10 minutes before the flight. The flight was still there and the doors were still open. While I argued for over 10 minutes about how important it was for my son to be on that flight, they were not concerned and let the flight leave right before our eyes, which brought my son and I to tears. I asked for a customer service representative. He explained this was the last flight that would reach Cleveland for the day and that I would have to wait for the next flight, which left at 6:50 Sunday morning. This left us in San Francisco for almost 24 hours with a handicapped son and no luggage. By the way, our luggage made it on the flight. Our luggage contained all of my son's skincare items and his clean clothes. It also contained a charger for his electric scooter. My son has open wounds all over his body, and these wounds must constantly be cared for in a sterile environment and kept clean, or he risks serious infection. Wound care was not an option in an airport restroom. When confronted with the situation, the customer service representative stated that he would give me a list of hotels in the area, but he claimed that we were not there 10 minutes before the flight, so he could not compensate us for a cab or a room. I did not have money for this option. He also stated that because of my son's scooter, we needed to be at the gate before the 10-minute cutoff. At no time was I offered the option of talking to the airport's compliance resolution officer. He said he would get back with me, but I never saw or heard from him again. Our scooter ran out of power because I did not have our luggage, which was already in Cleveland. I had to end up pushing a scooter with him on it through airports in San Francisco, Chicago, and Cleveland. No wound care was attempted on my son for this period of time. When we got to Cleveland, our bags were waiting in the Southwest office for us. Please consider this email a formal complaint. This is one of the worst complaints I've ever received for Southwest. This was not typical of our employees. This was not a typical guest experience. It was just heart-wrenching. And we had to be very careful because it was a disability-related complaint, and there are certain issues and ways that we have to respond to those in terms of our legal obligations. So normally, you know, I wouldn't be able to give the kind of apology that I would want to in such a horrible situation, but I actually, I went to our legal department with this particular letter, and I asked them if we could do something special and go above and beyond for this customer. And by doing so, I actually took Southwest out of compliance because we were required to respond within 30 days, and what I wanted to do would require us to take a little bit longer, but we kind of weighed the pros and cons, and we decided to respond a little later, but I think that it paid off because the customer ended up being really happy with everything. So I'll share my response. Okay, so this is what I wrote back. I said, "Your letter has struck a chord with all of those whose desk it has reached. Your experience is not remotely indicative of the level of service that we strive to or are known to provide. On behalf of Southwest Airlines, please accept our deepest apologies. Before I delve into the specifics of your situation, it's important to explain our boarding procedures. Boarding passes may be obtained up to 24 hours prior to a flight's departure at Southwest Airlines ticket counters, departure gate podiums, e-ticket check-in kiosks, SkyCap podiums, or on our website at southwest.com. If a customer checks in less than 20 minutes prior to departure, or if a flight is overbooked and all available boarding passes have been assigned, a security document will be issued and the customer will have to go to the departure gate to try to obtain a boarding pass. We still expect our customers to proceed to the gate because even though a flight may be overbooked, it may not necessarily end up being oversold. An oversale occurs when every customer who is booked on a flight checks in and arrives on time. In the event of an oversale, our customer service agent will solicit volunteers to take a later flight in exchange for denied boarding compensation. If there are no volunteers, the last customer to check in will be involuntarily denied boarding. But according to our contracted carriage, if there is a customer who is not in the gate area at least 10 minutes prior to departure, the customer may lose his or her reserved seat on a flight and will not be eligible for denied boarding compensation. That said, our records indicate that your family checked 3 bags at 10:57 a.m. for flight 1575, which was scheduled to depart at 11:20 a.m. Since you checked luggage less than 30 minutes prior to departure, our CSA was correct to inform you that your bags would be considered late checked. For the future, I want to let you know that assistive devices, which would include your son's skincare items, don't count toward the carry-on limit, provided the items are packed separately from other carry-on items. And we recommend that customers carry on board any medication or assistive devices that can be stowed in accordance with FAA regulations. If you still prefer to check your son's medical supplies, please tell our CSA that your luggage contains these essential items. As our employees are aware that your family was on the way to the gate after you checked in, they should have immediately begun soliciting volunteers to take a different flight. Indeed, regardless of the time you actually reached the gate, the flight would have been oversold as it departed with only 1 empty seat. In these situations, it is customary for the CSA to issue voluntary denied boarding compensation to customers who have been 10-minute ruled. Our employees should have retrieved your luggage once you informed them that it contained your son's medical supplies. Additionally, your family should have been reaccommodated on the next available flight that day, and you should have been afforded the opportunity to speak with a complaints resolution official to complete a report of complaint. Our employees are empowered to do the right thing for our customers, even when doing so goes against policy or standard procedures or costs us extra money. We expect our employees to use their best judgment when accommodating customers, while still keeping company objectives in mind, of course. And we deeply regret that the events of June 27th unfolded as they did. So then this goes into what we call our compliance paragraph, and it's where we have to say whether or not we complied with federal regulations. So I go into that and I just say, based on the information we have available, we failed to comply with federal regulations because we did not retrieve your luggage that contained your son's medical supplies and because you were not given the opportunity to speak with the CRO. Words cannot fully express how sorry we are. I realize there is nothing I can do to erase your family's memory of this unpleasant experience, but I want you to know that your concerns are being taken seriously by our leaders and all appropriate measures will be pursued. Furthermore, as a gesture of goodwill, I have mailed under separate cover a check for $1,858.80, which you should receive shortly. This check represents the amount of involuntary denied boarding compensation, twice the amount of their one-way fares, not to exceed $800, that we pay per passenger when we are unable to provide alternate transportation that arrives at the customer's final destination within 2 hours of the originally scheduled arrival time. I have also enclosed 3 complimentary round-trip passes with the hope that your family will give us another opportunity to show you what customer service at Southwest Airlines is really about. Please accept these gestures in the spirit intended. By law, I'm required to inform you that should you wish to pursue this further, you may contact the United States Department of Transportation. Sorry, this is longer than I remember. We have an obligation to inform you in writing within 30 days of your right to pursue this matter further with the DOT, and I'm responsible for our failure to meet this regulatory requirement because I really wanted to take some extra time to evaluate this situation and ensure that my response would help restore your family's faith in our employees. In researching your letter, I learned that the Children's Skin Disease Foundation camp that your son attended, the organization's mission really touched my heart, so I asked our leaders to make arrangements for Southwest to sponsor a child in Matthew's name to be sent to Camp Wonder. We sent the donation online yesterday. Again, thank you for contacting us. It is only through customer feedback that we may address problems and continue to improve our company and our service. Your family's patronage and friendship mean the world to us, and we humbly ask your forgiveness for this incident. It would be our privilege to serve your family again under more endurable circumstances. So that just kind of gives you an idea. This was, again, not a typical situation and not a typical response because of the legal issues involved, but Southwest decided to make an exception in this case to really apologize to this family because they deserved it and to really compensate them for the inconvenience that they experienced. So, anybody have any questions about anything before I turn it over to Kim?
Okay, give Adrian a round of applause if you would, ladies and gentlemen. All right, go ahead, ask
On
the question.
average, how many complaints do you get in a day, would you say?
At Southwest?
Yeah. Is
Thousands.
it thousands? Okay.
Yeah, it was thousands and thousands, phone and email, but there were less than 1% of our total customer base, and we still received 3 times as many compliments to complaints at Southwest Airlines, which is really remarkable for any company. So it's really cool.
Cool. Thank you very much, Adrian. Appreciate that. We'll have a chance to ask Adrian other questions too after Kim finishes. Both of them will take questions. And now I'm going to bring you Kim Seal. He's a senior writer in the Customer Relations Department of Southwest Airlines. He works in the corporate headquarters, which is adjacent to Dallas Love Field. I think you know where that is. And he's approaching his 5th anniversary with Southwest Airlines. Kim is a Richardson native. How about that? Current resident with a bachelor's degree in general business from the University of Texas at Austin. We'll try to overlook that. But since graduating from UT, he worked in retail management before spending 25 years as a regional sales manager at a manufacturing company. In his role representing that firm, he was responsible for the employees and overall sales of a 7-state region. During that time, he traveled quite a bit by car and by air, with his airline of choice being Southwest Airlines. So, when he found himself in the job market, as you might imagine, he went there, and it was, in fact, he was a customer at Southwest for 33 of his 41 years before becoming a company-wide layoff, putting him back in the job market. So the timing was right for him to move from long-time customer to a hopeful long-time employee, which he did. Kim has 2 grown children and memories of growing up nearby when UTD was just several square miles of farmland. Please welcome Kim Seal, ladies and gentlemen.
So Dennis told me that he wanted me to come and talk to you guys about some of the engineering aspects of our airplane, just to describe and explain Bernoulli's principle of aerodynamics. Wait, this is an engineering class, right?
It is, yes,
okay,
of course
so
it
you guys
is.
will know exactly what I'm talking about, coefficients of drag and center of gravity, those things. Or we could talk about business communication, whatever you prefer. We have, if I I can find the mouse here. There it is. And Adrian really references quite well. What I brought here is, this is kind of a synopsis of what we fondly refer to as Colleen's Bible. The lady that she spoke about, who is now retired, really established the way that we address our customers, the way we respond. And so we're going to kind of talk in general about some of that. But just as an overview, whenever you're thinking about communication, why do we communicate? If you don't stop and answer that question, your communication is going to be flawed. What's your name?
Norman.
Norman. If I wanted to communicate with Norman about a movie that I saw the other night, I would talk to him about the movie. I would tell him about what it was about, what I liked, what I didn't like. I'd ask him what he liked. I wouldn't talk to him about the football game because he wasn't interested in talking about football. He wanted to talk about the movie. So if we address a customer in a way that's not what they're asking about, we've really failed to meet their expectations. We have at Southwest a huge reputation among our customers and within the industry of really doing a great job of talking to our customers and how we treat them. And I think that comes because we really take care in how we communicate. And not just in writing, not just in my department, but we actually have 43,000 Goodwill ambassadors at our company. Those are people that work at the airports, they work on the telephones, they fly the airplanes, they serve out drinks and peanuts on board. Literally, we tell our employees that every one of you represents our company. You never know when you're going to have an interaction with a customer, so you need to be prepared to speak on our behalf. So it's really important that we understand that, but there's some overriding principles. One of them, Adrian kind of alluded to, and excuse me, she worked in an area that was a lot more sensitive. I don't get into some of those super sensitive ones, but there are overriding legal requirements. If you know anything about the federal government, we have to answer to the Department of Transportation. The DOT sets rules for when you can answer, how soon you have to answer, and how good that answer has to be. If you give me a complaint about 14 things and I don't address any of them, and I just say, well, really sorry, sounds like you had a bad time, hope it's better next time. DOT's going to say, no, that was not a responsive response. You didn't answer any of his concerns. You didn't explain what happened. You didn't offer any sort of specific apology. So that would fail the litmus test that the DOT has. And if we fail to meet that, as Adrian well knows, there's a huge financial penalty that we would incur that I don't think we've done very many times in our department, but we sure want to avoid doing it. That's from the legal side. That's from the regulatory side. But what's the other side of that? Who is it that we're talking to? What's the first name of my department? Customer relations. We're talking to our customers. What do customers represent in the business world? Hello, is this a business class? Revenue, anybody heard that word? How do we operate? We operate by revenue. We want everybody in this room to buy a ticket from us and fly with us. And if you are not doing that, then we want to address that. Is there a reason why? So not only are we trying to satisfy the government in our responses, we also have to understand who our audience is. Our audience are people that we would like to do business with us. So part of our overriding goal is, at the end of the day, we're addressing all these issues, which may be very, very minor and may be very major. At the end of the day, what we want is for that customer to come back. We want them to say, you know what, I'll get over this and I'll fly with you again. That's what we want to see happen. So on the one side, we have to follow those really close legal guidelines, but at the same time, we want to hold out an olive branch and say, you know, I'm really sorry. We really would like for you to come back. We're in an industry that is very competitive. We have other people that will serve their needs if we don't. So we can't just say, get lost, we don't need you. The reality is we need every single customer, and we want every one of them to come back. So not only does our response have to meet the requirements for their complaint, it has to be invited to say, you know what, we'd like for you to come back. So we have some general writing guidelines here that hopefully help to address those points. And I'm not going to read through every point of it. If you look at the highlighted bold parts, acknowledge the letter. I mean, that's just really basic. You think about it. If I say something to you or send you something, you say, thank you for letting me know about that. I appreciate that. State the facts of what happened simply. And Adrian addressed this really well. If, let me pick somebody else. How about you? What's your name?
Brent.
Brent. Okay, Brent. How about I come to you and I say, you know what? When I was coming in this evening, I pulled up in the parking lot. Adrian pulled up right next to me, opened her car door and banged my car and put a big gash in it. And I want you to apologize for that. What's your response going to be? Or how about, and she alluded to this, there's different sides to the story. Did you see it happen? No, you didn't see it happen. So maybe she really did that. Or maybe I'm making it up. Or maybe it kind of happened, but in a slightly different fashion. So when we talk about stating the facts of what happened, we can only address the facts. And her last letter was a great example of going through and saying, all right, our records indicate you checked your bags at the ticket counter at X time. Okay, that's a known fact. We know when that happened. We know certain things in a lot of situations that we encounter, so we can state those facts. We can't speculate on things that we don't know. So we want to state those facts. We want to address each complaint point by point, but don't overkill. There are times that several issues can be covered by one explanation. As she mentioned, sometimes we'll get letters that are a laundry list of things, but there's really one main point, and your response can get way blown out of proportion if you try to go after every single little thing. So you want to kind of keep that in mind. Next one, assure that your responses flow. Unless somebody's writing about one specific instance, then you may address different things. So you don't want it to sound like it's all chopped up and, you know, I'm sorry your bag was late. I'm sorry your flight was late. I'm sorry this, I'm sorry that. You need to kind of bring it together as you live in a conversation. Next, never expect the customer to be able to read between the lines. There's certain things that we understand, they may not understand. This last case that she had in her letter, the customer may have had some really unreasonable expectations of what we could do because they showed up at the airport so late. She points out there, our bags even made it on the flight. Well, that's different than you getting through security and you making it all the way to the gate in time for you to get on that flight. So sometimes we have to make sure that the customer kind of understands what's going on. The next, never expect the customer to be able to read between the lines. I'm sorry, I did that one. Tone, be matter of fact when necessary, use emotions when appropriate, but always try to convey a we care attitude. This goes back to what I was talking about these are customers. We want to keep in mind, these are people that we would like to see again. These are not people that we can just sort of say to them, you know, it's the way it goes, too bad, so sad, I'm sure sorry that happened. No, we care. We want you to have a good experience. So we want things to go well for you. So sometimes you can display a sense of humor if you know your audience, use common sense. The next is consistency, and that's a huge, huge thing for our company. And if you're thinking about communication in general, whatever company you work for, if you've got more than one person who is responding on behalf of the company, you want all of them to sound consistent. We talked about the Southwest Voice. When Adrian was working in our department and when I'm working there, if they got a letter from either of us, they should be able to chop off the name at the bottom and not tell the difference between who wrote it. If she's writing completely different from everybody else, then it sounds disjointed and it's not speaking with the company in mind. And again, we have to think about and some of the issues she addressed from a legal standpoint. And I tell some of our new employees sometimes when we're going through some training exercises, I'll ask for a show of hands and I'll ask in here, who's heard of Gary Kelly? Does anybody know who Gary Kelly is? Okay, a few folks. How about Herb Keller? You might have heard of Herb Keller. Okay. So these people have been the leaders of our company. And you saw at the top of Adrian's letter, we have a little letterhead. And their letterhead looks a lot different from mine. Theirs says chairman of the board, or CEO, or president, or something like that. I'm just a peon. I don't have a letterhead that looks like that. But what's the difference between a letter from Gary Kelly, who's our CEO, and a letter from me, Mr. Peon? Nothing. I'm speaking on behalf of the company. I'm speaking on behalf of 43,000 people. Now, do my words carry as much weight as Gary's words? Depends on how you want to answer that. If I send out a written response on our behalf, on our letterhead, yeah, they carry the same weight as our CEO. So if I say, here's what we're going to do, or here's what we can't do, or here's what I would like to offer to you, it's just as a big deal as if our CEO wrote that. So we have to keep in mind when we're answering, it's not like I can say, I'm just a nobody, so I can say whatever I want to say. No, we're speaking on behalf of a multi-billion-dollar company. So every word that we put out there is important. And it doesn't matter whose name is at the bottom, the name at the top says Southwest Airlines. So that's why consistency is important. Length is important. Keep your letters as short and concise as possible. We kind of use a rule of thumb that our answers should be roughly equivalent to what the customer wrote us. If they wrote a 3-page letter to us, it's okay to write a 3-page letter in response. It's not okay to write a 3-line email to them. On the other hand, if they've written a 4-line email, it's not appropriate to send a 4-page letter in response. So you want to match what you're writing to what you've received. And you think about, like, on your smartphones or cell phones, you get a text message, you don't expect it to be 16 paragraphs of information. But if someone was to send you an email, it's probably going to be a little bit longer. Same thing, we want to address it the same way. Always end on as positive a note as possible. I hope you picked up on the brilliantly written letter that she showed you that talked about a really ugly scenario, but at the end, she ended positive. We are really sorry. Here's what we would like to offer you. By the way, we have gone out and proactively sponsored a child to your son's camp as part of our apology to you and as a demonstration that we really do care about this. It's a very positive way to end it. You don't want to end with, well, you know, I know that this was a really horrible experience and, oh well. You want to try to end upbeat if you can. She talked about edit. Always proofread your material. Bear in mind that spell check is not always your friend. Your professor showed me one of the letters that one of you guys wrote, and there was a word in there that you're talking about, we will refund your fight. Fight is a good English word, and spell check had no problems with that, but what the writer meant was we will refund your flight. So don't just hit spell check and say, okay, no errors, it's all fine. You need to proofread it, see if it kind of makes sense. One of the things that we do in our department often is, depending on the sensitivity of the response, we'll have someone else proof our work too, so that there's a second set of eyes on it. Okay, and how are we doing on time? Do you want to look at a letter or two? Or
Sure.
not?
Yeah, we've got about 30 minutes left, so.
Okay. Happy letter or sad letter?
Sad.
All right, I'll give you a choice. Here is, and I'm not going to show you the letter that was sent to us. I'm showing you my reply. This is a customer who, this is a customer who had a flight delay, and it really affected their plans. And as is common these days with people who complain, the complaint pretty much ended with, and I'll never fly you again. You know, this was really so horrible, never set foot on your airplane again. So my response to him, and I've kind of edited it out to keep privacy, I thanked him for his correspondence and acknowledged the situation. Thank you for sharing your experience on Southwest Airlines from April with me. It is always disappointing to hear from one of our customers who has walked away from a trip with us feeling dissatisfied, so I appreciate the opportunity to research the circumstances regarding the incident. Okay, so I've acknowledged what he said to us. You had a bad situation, and to Adrian's point, and this is something that we really talk about a lot, accepting guilt. I can tell you, I'm really sorry that I did X. Okay, that is basically the admission that I did it. Or I can say I'm really sorry that you had a bad experience. There's a big difference. We don't want to assign blame, even if it's not a legal issue, if we weren't there to see it, if we don't know what happened, if we didn't hear the employee side of the situation. We can regret someone's inconvenience, we can apologize for a delay, but one of our common expressions that we use is, I'm not gonna throw that employee under the bus. I don't know what happened at the airport. I wasn't there, I didn't hear it, I didn't see it. So it's not appropriate for me to say, you know, I am sorry that Joe yelled at you when you tried checking in for your flight. I don't know if Joe did or didn't yell at the customer, but I don't want to admit in writing that he did by apologizing for it. So I can say, I'm really sorry that you had a negative experience at the airport. That's a fair statement to say. Now I'm going to go into the facts. Our records indicate that flight number 1790 from Oakland to Burbank was canceled on April 25th due to air traffic control directives that were initiated as a result of inclement weather. Since safety is our #1 concern at all times, we obviously will not operate a flight under conditions that might jeopardize the well-being of our customers and crew. And again, this is different in the Southwest voice, and as you get into communication, you will learn different things. Adrian mentioned it. This is part of our culture, and this comes from Colleen Barrett, is we capitalize customers, we capitalize crew, we capitalize words like safety. And that's not sort of just an empty expression. That's our way of saying, you know what, this is something that's really important to us. Safety is important, our customers are important, our crew, our employees are important. These are words that mean more than just, well, our customers. No, it's our customers. And of course, we must abide by ATC direction. We realize that irregular operations result in inconvenience for everyone involved. We make every effort to minimize both delays and cancellations, and that we regret that you were unable to travel as scheduled. I understand that your main concern was the lack of communication and accommodations made for you as a result of the irregular operations and ultimate flight cancellation. Our folks usually do a very good job of posting any flight cancellations and making several announcements to keep our customers informed by any changes to the flight status. Nevertheless, I apologize if our employees fell short of the level of service which we expected to give our customers at all times, and especially during the irregular operations. Now, by show of hands, who noticed something in that sentence jumps out at you? 1, 2, 3, 4, it's coming to you. All right. Who wants to, you had your hand up first, what do you see?
If.
Thank you. Anybody else see anything different, or is that pretty much what everybody caught? That's a key phrase right there. Nevertheless, I apologize our employees were rude to you. I apologize if our employees, and then I'm going to go into an explanation. That's part of not throwing them under the bus. I don't know if they were rude. Rude is a matter of perception, okay? I'm from Texas. We say howdy, how are you? If I go to New York City and I walk into a convenience store, the guy says, what do you want? I might think, whoa, that guy's rude. But in New York City, maybe that's the way he talks to everybody. Yeah, what do you want? Yeah, what do you want? It's nothing personal, it's the way they're talking. They may not say, hi, how are you? Welcome to our store. What can I get you today? So to my perception, I'm thinking he's rude. To him, that's the way he talks to everybody. So I don't want to ask for an apology that he was rude to me, but I can say, well, I apologize if our employees seemed rude, or if you felt that we were being rude to you. Let me roll that up a little bit more. While we recognize that you were inconvenienced and incurred added expenses to your unexpected overnight stay, our contract of carriage, and that's the legal operating document that we do business under Department of Transportation approval, does not provide for the reimbursement of expenses such as meals, hotels, rental cars, etc., related to flights that do not operate as scheduled. Additionally, even the U.S. Department of Transportation deems maintenance irregularities along with inclement weather and air traffic control delays or cancellations as uncontrollable events, and they do not expect any airline to compensate customers when travel is canceled or postponed under these conditions. Okay, so I've now responded from a legal standpoint. Let me just make this clear to you. The government doesn't require me to do anything. Okay, so I've just set the stage for this customer to be able to say, nevertheless, it is obvious that we have not scored a very high grade with you in regard to your experience, and we know that your confidence in our ability to serve you has been shaken. As an expression of our regret and as a gesture of goodwill, I am sending you a $200 Southwest Love voucher in a separate mailing. The voucher may be applied toward any future travel on Southwest Airlines that is completed within 1 year. I hope that you will accept this voucher as our invitation to give us a chance to earn back your confidence on another trip. I also hope that this incident will not diminish your previously positive feelings about Southwest Airlines as a whole, and that you will give us the privilege of welcoming you on board a Southwest flight again, so that we can continue to provide you the level of service and courtesy for which we strive. So, I've told them, you know, I'm really sorry this happened. I acknowledge what happened. I'll state the facts that I have. I've explained that I'm not required to do anything beyond expressing regret. That's it. However, we go back to one of my first points. Who am I talking to? Talking to someone that I would like to come back and fly with us again. So even though I don't have to, I'm going to offer him a token of our apology in the form of travel money that he can use in the future. It's like travel credit. And then I've also played on the fact that he told me in his original correspondence, I've been a customer of yours for a long time. Okay? So I want to acknowledge, I hope that this will not diminish your previously positive feelings. Why have you been a long-time customer? Because you've had positive experiences. You wouldn't keep coming back if it was awful over and over and over. So that's a little bit of psychology to sort of say, you know, we've had a good relationship in the past, and it's kind of a subtle way of saying, I hope you'll keep this in perspective and not let this one particular incident sort of just dismiss everything that's happened for the last 10 years. So I'm really kind of playing on his memories to say, yeah, you know, I mean, it was kind of crummy that time, but I've overall had pretty good experience with them. So I'm hopefully getting him thinking more positive, saying, okay, let's think about the good times and let's see if we can't recreate those a little bit. So that's kind of an example of a response after you've seen the guidelines for how we want to respond. Does anybody think this does or does not meet those guidelines? Thank you. What would you do differently? Now, obviously, you didn't see the customer's original letter, but you get the sense of what he was complaining about. Who, after hearing what Adrian said and what I've said, would think of a different way you'd want to respond? Is this the only response we could have sent? One of the things that a term that Adrian used, I don't know if you picked up on it, is empowerment. At Southwest Airlines, we strongly want to empower our employees at all levels to make appropriate decisions. So that means if I got this gentleman's original letter and she got this gentleman's original letter, our responses might be different. She might have said, you know what, let me refund your ticket. I might have said, let me send you a $200 voucher. She might have said, let me send you a $100 voucher. I might have said, let me give you 2 free tickets. Okay, are any of those responses wrong? No. The reason why they're not wrong goes back to the lady that we talked about that established our guidelines for response. Her overriding slogan is, do the right thing for the customer. If I feel like the right thing to do for this gentleman is offer him $200, then that was the right thing to do. If you felt like the right thing to do was offer him 50 cents, I might question your judgment, but that was the right thing to do because you thought it was the right thing to do. At the end of the day, if my boss calls me in the office and says, tell me why you did this for this customer, I'm going to say, you know what, I reviewed the situation, I felt like that was an appropriate response, I did the right thing for the customer in my opinion. what's his answer or her answer gonna be? It's gonna be, you know, I see where you're coming from. In this case, that's fine. He might say, in the future, maybe what you've done is a little out of balance for what happened. Maybe you gave too much or not enough, or maybe you overcommitted something we shouldn't have done. So next time if you have one like this, let's do it differently. But they're not gonna beat me up for how I handled this one, because it was my decision to make. And they recognize that everyone's gonna handle it a little bit differently. Is the writing gonna be different? Yeah, but if we're all fully trained responders, it's gonna be very similar. Now, we may come at it with slightly different words here and there, but overall it goes back to the thing I talked about. If you took this off the bottom, you shouldn't be able to tell who wrote it, because my response shouldn't be written so totally different from everybody else's that it would stand out. It would be a huge difference. So that kind of goes to what's our purpose in communicating, what is an example of how we would approach it, and then how do you decide what's the right thing to do? In her case, she took a really ugly situation to heart, and she felt compassion, and that was something that was in one of her first slides, is compassion. One of our little icons that we use in our company is a heart, and we talk about being the love airline, and we show heart as part of that. That's because we really do feel a compassion for our customers. If you work in my department and you don't have compassion for customers, you need to move to another department or find something else. Because if you read that first letter that she had up there about that experience that they had, okay, let me explain that some of what we did was not the best procedure, but guess what? What they did was wrong too. The customer presented themselves or created a situation that was a no-win situation for everybody. It was by their actions that things started falling apart. And that's very common. People contact us and say, I showed up at the airport 4 minutes before my flight and I can't figure out why I didn't get on. Okay? To start with, you showed up 4 minutes before your flight. That's where it started going downhill. That wasn't our fault. The airport was open, there were parking lots out front, we had employees there, we did our part, but you didn't. But we can't say that to the customer. We can't say, well, it's your fault, you messed up. Because we want them to come back. But at the same time, we want to have compassion. Yeah, she messed up, she did some things that led to missing that flight. But it doesn't mean we can't have compassion and say, wow, that was a bad situation. Your son's in bad shape, you had to stay overnight, you had to push him to the airports. It goes on and on. If you don't feel, after reading that letter, some compassion for that lady and her son, don't ever get in the customer relations business, because you're going to strike out. You say, well, too bad, her fault. Yeah, that's not going to work real well. So, you want to think about that. It's not cut and dry of saying, hey, you broke the rules? Too bad. One of the things that we look at in our department, and one of the things that's important in corporate communications from any company, is when do you stick to the rules and when do you say, you know what, we can make an exception. How many folks in here have ever had a situation where you've asked for an exception for something? It should be everybody in the class. At some point, you've asked for an exception. Why did you ask for it? One, you realize you messed up. That could be one reason. You're hoping they'll bail you out of the I'm sure that Dennis has heard many times, the dog ate my homework. Can you forgive me? And you just didn't do it. Come on, be honest. But you're blaming on the dog and you asked for an exception. Can you give me a little extra time to turn this in? What's another reason? It was outside my control. There was a huge traffic accident on Campbell Road. I'm sorry, Professor, I couldn't get here on time. The road was shut down, fire trucks everywhere, fire hoses, I couldn't get here. Okay, wasn't your fault, but you're still asking for an exception. What's another reason why you might ask for an exception? Because you are hoping that company will do something to make you feel good. Maybe you kind of realize it was your fault, but it also kind of wasn't, and you really hope they'll do something for you. If the response is always, nope, sorry, you know, you're late because of that accident out there, I locked these doors at 5:30. You're not here? Too bad. You didn't turn in your homework? 0. Sorry, that's where it goes. You're gonna think, wow, that's really hard-nosed. There are times that you have to be hard-nosed. Can I have a refund of the money on this ticket that I bought 10 years ago and I never used? I'm sorry, I can't refund your ticket from 10 years ago. That's a hard no. I can't do that. Now, do I just leave it there? Hopefully not. Hopefully I'll say, you know what? Let's explore something else that we might can do that would help you feel a little bit better. But then there's other times that we can say, yeah, I can do that for you. We don't normally do this. Like I've said in this letter, we're not required to do anything for this situation, but you know what? Let me see if I can't help you out a little bit. That's the compassion side. And you need to know what your company's policy is on compassion. Some of them may be, hey, give away the farm. I don't care what it takes, you get that guy back in here. Question?
If you end a letter with, or how do you close a letter that you have a certain no, I can't refund or give you anything? How do you close it?
Well, you always want to respond to someone's request. I want you to refund my ticket. We have to respond directly to that and say, I'm sorry, we're unable to honor your request. You have to be very clear. You can't just kind of, you know, be around the bush for a while and hope that they notice that you didn't say anything. You have to say, I'm sorry, we can't honor that request. But you always want to look for a way out. What can you do that's more positive? We're talking about ending on a positive note. Okay, I can't do that, but I can do this. One of the things I like to say to people whether I'm writing it or I'm talking to them on the phone is, you know what, that's just not something we can do, but I'd like to meet you halfway. Most people are agreeable to that because they understand compromise. You know, I want $500 from you because of this situation. You know, I'm sorry, I can't give you $500. I can't just hand you that money. That's not going to work. However, I can give you $250 in travel credit. I'd like to meet you part way there. I'm not leaving you empty-handed, so I would answer with, we're unable to honor your request. However, I'd like to meet you part way, I'd like to meet you halfway, or I'd like to offer this as a means to bridge what you're asking and what we're able to do.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop if you don't mind joining him at the front. Adrian, give Kim a round of applause while she's coming up. And I'm going to stop the video.